I'm going to click on it here.
You don't need to click on it.
I don't?
No, you can, it should use it. You can start. You can start.
Oh. Well, good morning. Shall I begin now?
You can begin from this page, and after I will one by one to allow the participants to unmute.
All right, Ellen, shall I begin?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, good morning, everybody, or at least it's morning here. I realize it's late afternoon where you are. I'm very, very happy to be here and to have a chance to talk with you about some of the problems in chemical reactions and also some of the work that we've been involved in the past, including the work that led many years ago to the Nobel Prize. It's interesting how this field that I worked in, the electron transfer reactions, began. It began as a very small corner of, let's see, I'm trying to advance this on. Yeah, it began as a very small corner of chemistry. It's amazing how sometimes major things develop from very tiny beginnings. In this case, there were studies in the laboratory of the simplest kind of reaction in all of chemistry. Now, chemistry has many different kinds of reactions, millions of reactions, but there's a particular reaction that's the simplest kind. Why is it simple? This type of reaction involves just the transfer of one electron from one chemical reactant to another chemical reactant. And an example is on this slide. What's shown there are two iron ions, one in different valence states, that's different charges on them. And to study that reaction, people use radioactivity. They use what's called radioactive tracers. And for example, they would take a solution containing a ferrous ion and a solution containing a ferric ion, different state of oxidation. And some of the ferric ions would have radioactive isotopes in them. They mix the two solutions and then after a while precipitate out and see what the precipitate has in terms of a radioactive ferrous ion. Began as a radioactive ferric ion and ended up as a radioactive ferrous ion. They would measure that as a function of time, and that would tell them how fast the reaction went. And now it's the simplest reaction in all of chemistry because all that it involves is the transfer of an electron from one ion, the ferrous ion, to the other ion, a ferric ion. Most chemical reactions involve breaking of one or more chemical bonds and forming one or more chemical bonds. This is simpler than that. This is just a transfer of an electron. So this is where it began. There were many studies of such reactions with iron, with many other metals instead of iron. It was found that some were fast and some were slow. And the scientists at the time tried to explain why some of these reactions, just a simple reaction, why some of them are fast and some of them are slow. And many years ago, there was a symposium at the University of Notre Dame in 1952 on these reactions. And Willard Libby, who later won the Nobel Prize for his work on radiocarbon dating, Libby gave an explanation of why some of the reactions were fast and some of them were slow, and he explained it in terms of size. In the explanation, he noted that an electron is such a light particle that when it jumps from one reactant to another, there's no time for the more massive particles like the nucleus or the water molecules to move during that time. And he was able to use that physics-based idea to explain why some of them are fast and some of them are slow. To go into that would involve technical detail, which I won't try to do here, but would be glad to in any questions. Well, that was 1952 when he gave that explanation. And several years later, 1956, I happened to be in the library. In those days, one spent a lot of time in the library reading journals and books. I happened to be in the library and came across this symposium that occurred in 1952. And I saw this article by Livy, and I saw the esoteric explanation that he gave that really excited me. You know, that's, I guess, what science and many other fields are about, to the extent that they excite one to learn and to do something, if one can. And I saw this explanation of Livy, and the explanation was essentially, without getting into technical detail, that the electron is such a light particle compared with everything else there, that when it jumps, there's no time for the other things to move. So the electron transfer from one reactant to the other, in the case of this slide here, from a ferrous ion to a ferric ion, occurs so rapidly when it does occur that there's no time for the nuclei to move. And he showed from that that could give rise to a very big reaction barrier if the ions were very small, if they were highly hydrated. If they're small, they're highly hydrated because of the small distance between the center of charge of the ion and the water molecules around them. Well, he applied this Frank-Condon principle, which had been devised around 1925 in the beginning of quantum mechanics, or quantum theory, what have you, and quantum mechanics. And I'd never before seen the Frank-Condon principle applied to chemical reactions. I had previously worked and published theoretically on other kinds of reactions, unimolecular reactions, but this was new. So I was very, very excited. And then on looking at it, I began to feel uneasy because something didn't quite feel right. I mean, the idea of applying the Frank-Condon principle, the fact that the electron is such a light particle, there's no time for the nuclei to move during the actual electron jump, and the consequences of that seemed right, but other parts of it didn't seem right. I just felt uneasy about it. You know, sometimes in science, you don't necessarily come to the answer right away. It's sort of a process of back and forth and back and forth, and maybe eventually zeroing in on what may be the right answer. And then I realized that what was the essence of Livy's idea, which was that if the ion is small and the electron jumps, then there's a huge change in the interaction of the charge with the water molecules around it, because the water molecules around it have been distributed to one charge, but all of a sudden there's a new charge foreign to it, and that creates a huge barrier. And I realized what was missing in Livy's explanation is that it actually violated the law of conservation of energy. I mean, it's as simple as that. And the question was, how could one apply that quantum mechanical Frank-Condon principle and still satisfy the law of conservation of energy? And I realized that what had to happen was that before the electron could jump, the water molecules around the two ions, had to rearrange themselves to some compromised configuration. And eventually I was able to work out what's involved there, what is the energy barrier, what is a free energy barrier to reaction that make it go fast or slow, what have you. So that's how this electron transfer reaction began. And recently, let me see. Oh, this is other kinds of electron transfer reactions. They're what's called isotopic exchange reactions. And here's a mixture reaction. That was just for some, just to say that there are other kinds of reactions. I described some of this history in a volume of the Journal of Chemical Physics that's shown there. It's a volume, Chemical Physics, a couple of volumes that we're celebrating the 65th year of the electron transfer theory. So maybe then, just by way of introduction, I'll just show those slides. I happen to have other PowerPoints, but maybe that will suffice just for the beginning. The main thing is that if one is interested in seeing some of that early history that I've just described, then one can find it in this particular journal, and that's the particular article. So perhaps I can stop here and take any questions that you may have.
One second, I will allow the participant to. Влада, you can tell anything.
Янток, ти звучи.
Не слухай, да? А можна питаннячко? Було ще досліджено, шановним паном, явище переносу декількох електронів. Не одного, а декількох. На 3 питаннячка.
Окей. Напишіть.
Зараз ми напишемо. Явище переносу не одного, а декількох електронів, да? Ми зараз набираємо.
Okay, the question was from our participant about the transfer not only of one electron, but 2 or more simultaneously.
Yes, typically most of these reactions that are electron transfer reactions involve the transfer of 1 electron. Now, there are some cases where it's theoretically possible to have a transfer of 2 electrons. For example, if one takes the thallium ion, the main ions that are involved are the thallus and the thallic, and they differ by 2 charges, not just 1 charge. So in those cases, it's theoretically possible that you could have a transfer of 2 electrons. On the other hand, the difference around each ion when 2 electron transfers is even a bigger difference than when there's just a transfer of 1 electron. There's a bigger sort of, the new ions are formed in a much more strongly undesirable environment. So the barriers can be huge, and when you estimate what they are huge. So if it's a 2 electron transfer, then it's most likely it's not a simple electron transfer, but rather atoms moving with the electrons, and that's probably the way the reaction occurs. Now, there are other kinds of processes where more than 1 particle just transfers. For example, a major field in chemistry now is what's called proton-electron coupled transfer, okay? Where both a proton is transferred and an electron is transferred. There are lots of those kinds of chemical reactions that are being studied nowadays. And part of the discussion that occurs, do they occur simultaneously or do they occur consecutively? And that type of discussion has been going on for quite a while. And people make calculations to try to decide whether they're going separately or together. and in fact, there are even some such reactions where there are two particles being transferred, in this case, a proton and an electron, where they may come from different sites. That happens in a particular enzyme, for example. So this whole field and that whole question, if you extend it to not just one electron versus two electron transfers, if you extend it to two particle transfers, then that's now quite a large field in current chemistry, actually.
Okay, I guess when our participants preparing their questions, we can ask you something about probably your biography. Like, how did you become interested in the work in science? Like from this old, like from this time when you were young, and did you thought when you were young, did you thought that you will be a Nobel Prize laureate or the big famous scientist?
Well, let me answer the first question first. When I was young, I hadn't even heard of the Nobel Prize. I couldn't think about it. No, I never thought in terms of the Nobel Prize or anything like that. For one thing, I grew up in Montreal, Canada, and it wasn't as though there were a lot of Nobel Prize winners around when didn't have neighbors who were Nobel Prize winners. So I didn't think in those terms at all. In fact, even many years later, I didn't think in those terms. Strangely enough, or commonly enough, I just thought in terms of science being a fun thing to do. You know, you're dealing with the real world there. The results you're trying to explain, and it's you know, just an interesting challenge. And now, as far as interest going way back, of course, I knew nothing about science when I was young, but I did have a lot of construction toys. I mean, there are erector sets, there are other kinds of construction toys where you build things. And I played with those things incessantly. And in a way, science can be like that. You know, problems come up and they're more sophisticated than building something with construction toys. But problems come up and you try to figure out how to put it together. So I think if there is anything in my childhood that was related to indirectly to science, it was playing with these construction toys, which I did incessantly at times. Yeah. So no, I didn't think about. Now, it's true that in high school in Montreal, where I grew up, in high school, one had to make a decision in the third year of high school, 10th grade. One had to make a decision whether one is going to continue with Latin or go in or take courses in science. One, at that time in Montreal, one had that decision made. And even though I liked Latin very much, there is no question I was going to continue in science. So, you know, some of these things are almost without thinking. But I think it's the idea of putting things together that was present in childhood and many other childhoods of people, and science being, to some extent, just that, you know, putting, especially in theoretical science, theoretical chemistry, putting various elements together. In fact, when I look back on some of the different problems that I've worked on, it's been like connecting the dots. You know this experimental result, you know that result, you know that, are they connected in some way or another? When you hear some result, is there something related to that in the literature? You know, I think it's more like construction in the case of science, and certainly my own case, connecting the dots, and construction in the case of childhood, actually construction toys. So if there's any common theme, it's that, I think.
We have a question from participant.
Hello, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Do the probability fields of finding an electron in atom affects its jump?
I didn't understand.
Just ask him, the moderator.
Moderator, could you just repeat the question? And
1 second.
Do the probability fields of finding an electron in atom affects of his jump?
yeah, could you? I'm sorry, I don't understand. Yeah.
Is there a probability field of finding an electron in atom effect, in the effect of the jumping?
Oh, in other words, can one see the electron actually jump?
Yeah, like that.
Ah, okay. Oh, good question. Very good question. What one sees is not the electron in mid-flight, but the electron, after it is jumped or before it's jumped. Now, one doesn't see the electron, one sees the electron in the atom to which it's attached, really. So it's not just an electron by itself, it's the electron in the environment of the electron. Now, whether one could actually follow that progress, that would involve the study of very, very short times that are maybe 10 to the minus 14 seconds. That's a 1/100th of a picosecond or something. Now, there are experiments which tend to look at extremely short times and follow the behavior of the system, its absorption properties as a function of short times. And I think they're getting down to that scale. But what you actually see is sort of a change in response of the apparatus in that very short time. You don't see something saying, I'm an electron, I'm jumping. Instead, what you see is a change maybe in the absorption or a change in the reflection as a function of time. And the question is, how short a time can you look at nowadays? And they have some experiments that are, of the order of 50 femtoseconds. The femtoseconds is 10 to the minus 15 seconds. Typical times of motion of electrons and molecules are that sort of comparable with that, or 10 femtoseconds and so on. So actually, you observe changes in very short times. And one of the major developments that have occurred in the past 30 or so years has been studying chemical reactions in shorter and shorter and shorter times. So the answer is that you see changes in very short times. And as the years have gone on, increasingly sophisticated methods have been developed to observe changes in increasingly short times. When I started, if you studied a reaction that took minutes, you're very excited. You were studying fast reactions. And then that was reduced to maybe a millisecond, shorter. Somebody won the Nobel Prize for that. And then now even much shorter, and some people won, or somebody's won the Nobel Prize for very short times. And so, but that's certainly an active field of study by people studying behavior of the system at very short times after starting a reaction, maybe by shining light on it or something like that. A light of a very, very short pulse, actually. So that brings you really to the frontiers of one of the frontiers of modern research.
All right, the second question.
Hello. So I have a bit strange question, but still, do you feel that people are so slow compared with electrons?
Oh, well, yeah, we move much more slowly. Any massive object, some of us are more massive than others, but any massive object, it has time scales of seconds or so. And the electrons in some of these jumps are moving 10 to the 12th times faster than that. So, yeah, we as individuals move very slowly compared with the way some of these electrons can jump under appropriate circumstances.
Thanks. And I have one more question, economical question. Which field of chemistry is the richest? I mean, where is the most money? For example, if I want to become a chemistry scientist, I want to know in which field of chemistry I can earn the most money. If it's
it's an interesting question. Sometimes some of the best things in science are unexpected. And with it, perhaps some of the fields that exert the most money are also, unexpected. But, for some of us, this may sound funny or strange, but for some of us, science and ideas are kind of sacred. And learning about things and how things function can be such an exciting thing that one doesn't put it in the same context of money. Now, I know that it's important to earn money. I know that. And I know that some people are very much concerned with that. But working with ideas just seems, everybody should find what they're mostly interested in and do that, and not because somebody else is doing it. So I guess the short answer is that I don't know the answer to that, but clearly something related to, a friend of mine is just this thing here. Oh, a friend of mine here who's also a scientist said that solar energy is a good area to make money.
Photosynthesis.
Yeah, photosynthesis, yes. Yeah, artificial photosynthesis. I even have a slide related to that, but that's another story. Yeah. No, it's hard for me to answer that question, but certainly there's a lot of money to be made in science. Clearly some people are, and some companies are, making a lot. The companies that developed this vaccine against COVID is clearly doing very well. And the people who developed it are doing very well things. But current problems, energy and saving the atmosphere of the earth, and they're all important things. And if one is working in those areas, one won't necessarily make a lot of money. One has to, discover things in order to do so. But there's also the thought that what may count the most is what one gets the most enjoyment out of it. We're all here just for a certainly limited number of times. And for some, certainly making money is important. For others, they working with ideas is the most important thing. But there's certainly money to be made in all sorts of fields, but nowadays, certainly among the new fields, solar energy is a big place, because eventually it's presumably going to replace petroleum, what have you. Yeah.
Okay. One more question is about right now. Can we use some computer programs like for chemistry, like Gaussian or Hypercam, for the research with transfer?
Yeah. The biggest development, or one of the biggest developments that I've seen in my lifetime, has been the introduction of computers into chemistry. And now it's amazing what can be done. There have been so many developments that the people are able to develop techniques that permit them to accomplish more with less computer time than they did before. I mean, highly specialized techniques. Like just recently, there was an article published that had 49 contributors, probably about 30 or so different computer groups that contributed to that article on, was that on the virus? The article of Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the aerosol, on the detailed discussion.
Oh, yeah. This article that just appeared is on the aerosol that and the COVID-19 that's in it. I just learned about it yesterday. And it's an article where a huge number of computer groups, that are involved, in each with their own specialty and contributing to the article. But certainly the biggest change that's occurred in the past 50 or so years has been the introduction of computers into chemistry. It's just changed things dramatically. Now, all sorts of interesting questions arise, not merely in the use of computers in chemistry, but the use of computers in other fields. Namely, computers are invaluable, okay, in getting results that'd be difficult to get otherwise. On the other hand, part of science involves understanding things, if possible, in simple terms. And if it's just the computer results alone, left alone, one may not understand that. If, on the other hand, one asks of the computer various questions, so one learns about mechanisms from the computations, then one may have ideas that develop ideas that permit one to think of the experiments in somewhat different ways. I can make that more concrete because I know I've experienced a couple of examples there. But so I think the future is not just in computers, but in the interplay between computers and physical ideas, and using the computer sometimes as a kind of experiment, the experimental results. And then one tries to interpret them in simpler concepts that one then applies to other kinds of experiments. But yeah, computers play a major role now.
Sorry, I have a question. How did you measure such a fast speed and time of electron transferring?
Oh, you mean the very short times?
Yeah, how did you measure it? So with using what materials or tools?
Yeah, these are largely optical measurements involving very short laser pulses. Eventually, over the years, the laser pulses have got shorter and shorter and shorter, and now they're sort of in the femtosecond, or even in a sense shorter than that, attosecond thing. So it's by developing technology associated with lasers and related types of beams like electron beams, is in developing that technology to be able to study shorter and shorter, what's happening in shorter and shorter times. But it's a development that's occurred over the past, well, I don't know.
10 years.
Well, the latest stuff is maybe 10 years, but the whole development of the idea of studying things at faster and faster times, it certainly was recognized in the 1960s with the work of Porter, George Porter, and Eigen. I mean, much slower than these, but faster than had been studied at the time. So gradually over the decades, people have got to shorter and shorter time measurements. And I mean, when I started off, if one did things in minutes, that was great, very short. And now it's a factor of 10 to the 14th faster, so more than that probably.
Morena can ask the question.
Good evening. I have a question. I guess you have a lot of researchers. Which your research is the most important to you?
Oh.
Which of them you are proud and love the most?
Yeah. Well, I think if you ask, if one looks at the whole career, and then I'll come to your question of now, the most important research in terms of its application to problems in science has been the theory of electron transfer reactions. The next most important has been the theory of certain reactions in the gas phase, that occur in the ozone problem, that occur in pollution and so on. It's called unimolecular reactions and bimolecular reactions in the gas phase. And many, many years ago, I developed the theory of that, which is still the standard theory in the field. So those are the two most important. Now, there are a number of other problems that we worked on that I look fondly upon and I think played some role, but I think that those are the two fields that are regarded as the most important. But certainly I've worked on problems in a number of different areas that I found, exciting to work on. Like, for example, there's a series of organic reactions called on-water reactions where you mix an oil kind of thing with water very, very rapidly. You get a huge surface between the water and the oil. And if the oil contains certain organic reactants, then that can catalyze certain organic reactions, by maybe even a factor of 1,000,000 or something like that. And we worked on that problem of what's happening at the interface of the oil and the water and the reactants there. But, there have been quite a few problems that I've been excited about. But if I were to single two of them out, it'd be those two, And that's reflected, I guess, in the fact that those two studies are sort of more or less standard textbook material. So, but there have been lots of different reactions have been fun to study, and challenging, and some with more consequence than others. One can't necessarily predict when one does a piece of work what its consequences are going to be. In fact, sometimes it's a big surprise. One did some research just as an interesting exercise, and then all of a sudden it becomes a significant field.
The early solids problem.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like one problem that I worked on, but the jury is still out and may not be out in my favor. I don't know. But, in these meteorites that are found, one learns from some of these meteorites that land on Earth by studying them, what happened before the Earth, was created in the form that it is. In other words, going back many billion years ago, 4 or 5 billion years ago. And there's an interesting isotopic composition of the oxygen atoms or ions in these various early solids that were formed before the Earth was actually formed. So there are various theories of the isotopic composition of them. There are 3 isotopes of oxygen, has certain isotopic composition. And so one of the problems I worked on was trying to find a chemical explanation for that. And that's an example where I think the jury is still out, but I wouldn't be surprised if the ideas that I had are just not the appropriate ones. So, sometimes things don't necessarily work out, or you don't know whether they're working out.
You can ask.
Yes, I have a question also. What have you felt when you found out that you won a Nobel Prize? What have you felt?
How I felt?
Yes.
Well, I was excited because I did, the Nobel Prizes are described in the early part of October. I think for chemistry, it's usually around October 10. And I didn't, although I knew people had nominated me for the prize, I wasn't even thinking of it then at the time. In fact, I was at a meeting in Toronto when it was announced, and the way I heard about it was very indirect. The Nobel Committee, or the chairman of it, calls the Nobel Prize winner, and if he gets the winner, then speaks with him, fine. If he doesn't, he then goes on to the press anyways and announces it to the press. And anyways, I was at a meeting in Toronto, in Canada, at the time when it was announced. And as I say, I wasn't even thinking of it at all, even though I knew it was that time. Well, I wasn't even thinking it was that time. And I was at this meeting, and then somebody tapped me on the shoulder and saying, there's an urgent message for you. And I have 3 sons. And so immediately I thought, oh my God, something's happened with one of the boys, what have you. And so I went off with this chap to get to the phone. And I wondered, he said, at some point, the person who was accompanying me said, it's good news. Well, I didn't know what the good news was. I wasn't thinking in terms of the prize. I thought, oh, well, maybe they're giving me some award. But then that didn't seem right, because normally when you get an award at a meeting, they've discussed it with you beforehand to try to make sure you're going to be at the meeting. So that didn't seem right. And then as we walked further, the chap said it was a call from Stockholm. So at that point, I knew, of course, it was the prize. But yeah, it came as at that point as a surprise, although I knew I'd been nominated a number of times and so on. But still, statistically, the chances are small, but sometimes one's fortunate. Yeah.
Hello. I have a question too. What was the most difficult or uncomfortable part for you when you were taking your research?
When I did what?
Taking research.
Oh, doing research? Well, the most difficult part was I had gone on a postdoctoral to, well, there's a little bit of a story. In Canada at the time, when I grew up, there are no theoretical chemists. There are lots of experimental chemists, but there are no theoretical chemists. There are theoretical chemists in England. There are theoretical chemists in the United States. There are theoretical chemists elsewhere, but there were none in Canada. So those of us who were growing up in science in Canada, most of us, if we were interested in chemistry, we didn't think in terms of theory, just experiments. And so that's what I did. I did experiments for my doctorate. I did experiments, different kinds of experiments, for a postdoctoral at the National Research Council of Canada, Ottawa. But then I became very unhappy because I'd enjoyed certain theoretical ideas, namely mathematics, so much as a student, and I wasn't making use of them at the time. And so I felt, quite unhappy. And then I decided I'll try to learn about theory and try to get another postdoc, and which I did. So that's how the career began. It began by working with experiments and then realizing I was missing something. The only thing that I had related to that, I took a lot of mathematics in university, and I wasn't using it. So then I got that second postdoc. All right, now the most unhappy part was after that second postdoc, I applied for a job, for a position, an academic position. And I applied to 35 places, 35 universities. And as I've often said, I think I said it in the Nobel acceptance speech, as I've often said, I didn't get 35 no's because not everybody replied. But I would say that applying to many places and not getting a positive answer was one of the biggest sort of disappointments. But then shortly after that, I went to a scientific meeting where people were looking for hire people. And anyways, by a series of odd circumstances, all of them highly unlikely, I got connected with somebody who was looking to hire somebody, and I was then invited to give a talk at that university, Brooklyn Polytechnic, and then got the job and got started. But certainly the biggest disappointment was applying to so many places for a teaching research position and not getting a single positive reply.
All right, thank you. Also, I wanted to ask you that on what are you working right now? Like, have you something?
Yeah, what I'm working on now are these. Well, there's several problems actually, but one of them is these biological machines. Inside us, inside almost everything in nature, there are these biological motors that convert chemical energy to mechanical energy and vice versa. And they do all sorts of things in the human body, whether it's transporting ions across membranes or transporting cargo in cells and so on. There are various types of biological motors. And what we've done is we've taken some of the ideas from electron transfer reactions and applied them to these motors, even though these motors that we're studying have nothing to do with electron transfer reactions. But there are certain aspects that they have in common, namely transfer of particles, even if they're not electrons, from one thing to another. And we're making use of some of those concepts to analyze the behavior of these motors and to interpret the behavior in chemical mechanical terms. Like we've formulated a theory which combines mechanical energy and chemical energy, and recently published a review on it with a collaborator. Actually, the collaborator is from Romania originally, and we published quite a few papers on that. But the most active field that we're working on now are these biological motors. In fact, I guess in some of the slides, I have an example. I have an example of such a motor.
You can show it. You can show us.
Pardon?
You can show your slides.
Oh, all right. Let me, Alan. Yeah. All right. I'll go straight to the slides. All right. All right. I'll just go quickly to that slide. Oh, let me just show this slide. This slide here is the bilayer membrane, and it's involved. It's a slide connected with solar energy conversion, how light from the sun, say, is picked up on one side of the membrane by certain things that are called light harvesting compounds, and then they're electronically excited by the light, and they transfer an electron. Eventually, it's transferred across the membrane. So in this slide here, which came from Professor Mikkel Barley, who was at the Technical University of Munich, this describes various biological systems that are involved in energy conversion, that are involved in transport of ions, and many other things. And in one of the part of this, there's something called ATPase that, oh, I went that forward, I didn't mean to do that. So there's something called ATPase, and that's that biological motor. So let me just go to the next one. Here it is, and what this does here, it can do two things. One is it can take a chemical compound, the adenosine diphosphate, and an inorganic phosphate, and make an energy-rich compound, ATP, and it can do the reverse too. And it does that by an ion going across there and then causing something to turn, and then causing things to open and close. Anyways, there's a sequence of processes there. And we've been studying one part of this, namely what's involved in this particular part. This gives here an idea. Let's see if this, here's from Walker, who won the Nobel Prize for part of the structure of this that are being shown. And this shows this motor in action. It's a simulation from based on various crystal structures that he determined. And those are particles going in and other particles coming out, and the various motions that occur. Anyways, the research that we've been doing is involving various aspects of those motors. And this last slide that I showed shows a series of points for certain processes that occur, and the dots there are the experimental points, and the straight lines, the red and blue lines, are the theoretically calculated points with no adjustable parameters. So we've calculated using other kinds of properties to learn about these properties. So in brief, what we've been doing is studying various processes that occur in these motors. It's a huge field. It's much to be done, both circular motors like this one and linear motors like the other. They're very, very common in biology. Yeah, I mean, it's just it's filled with it. So we're trying to combine some of the earlier ideas that we had on chemical reactions with application to these motors and taking into account some of the mechanical work, because mechanical changes are occurring. Something's rotating, so on. Something's opening between those various lobes, those various units, and closing. Where we can, we try to make predictions without adjustable parameters, but occasionally we can do that as here. So we're trying to learn about the mechanism and trying to address a number of questions that people ask in the field. So what we're working on here is totally different in a way from work that we did earlier. And the only difference is some of the main ideas of trying to relate rates of reactions to thermodynamics and other things. We're doing that sort of thing here. We're actually applying equations that were derived for other processes to these problems here. So that's an example of something else we're doing. Another area that we've been working on is the electrical conductivity of single molecules. Nowadays, I mean, things have changed so much. You can actually, if the molecules are big enough, you can actually observe something about the molecules. And in particular, you can take two electrodes and actually bridge them with a single molecule and look at its conductivity. So recently we published some paper building on the work of others or extending the work of others to include some additional effects, some additional thermodynamic effects. So that's another example of a problem, but most of our time is spent on these biological motors, and recently we published a review of that work. And, yeah. So those are some of the things we're working on now.
I have one question. How does happen an electron transport in biological molecules? For example, does it happen in some parts of molecular, or does all molecule take part?
Oh, are you asking about the biological motors?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's an interesting question, because what we're treating there are reactions that involve either the breakup or the formation of a certain molecule. It's called an energy-rich molecule, adenosine triphosphate. So there's no electron transfer there. It's actually just breaking of various chemical bonds, hydrogen bonds, other bonds in the that are binding that molecule to the a cavity in the biological motor. So now, what we've done is we've taken the sort of formalism of the electron transfer and built on work that was done applying that formalism to reactions that have nothing to do with electron transfer. That the equations that came out of that, when you look at certain aspects of the equations that came out of that apply not only to electron transfers, but apply to methyl cation transfers, ion transfers, certain proton transfers. In other words, certain aspects of the equations are more general than the systems for which they were derived. And then much later, around 1965 or so, 68, I gave sort of a treatment of why equations that have been derived for electron transfer might over a certain range of application be applied to reactions that had nothing to do with electron transfers. And I could go into that at some length, you know, what they have in common. And so our entry into this biological system was not because of the electron transfers, although the electron transfers occur in biology a lot. It was related to transfers, in this case of particles, and the equations for that, certain aspects of the equations for that were similar to those for electron transfer. It's hard to explain it. If you have equations, sometimes they're written in a form which are very specific for the problem, like change of charge, the size of the reactants and things. But if you write them in another way, a certain more general way, that's just a special case of that more general type of equation. And it's that more general type of equation that we've applied to these biological motors. Even though there are no electron transfers involved, the more general type of equation seems to work. I don't know if I've described it, but that's basically what it is. Yeah. And, you know, some of this occurs you know, by luck, or some of, you know, by intuition, a feeling for something. What do they have in common? When it's not just the transferred electron, it may be the transfer of something else, you see. So there's certain aspects. So when something is transferred, instead of breaking and then forming, the energy barrier is much less, it turns out. And that's what these processes have in common with, say, electron transfer reactions. The reaction would be much slower in electron transfer reaction if the electron were transferred from a reactant to the water and then, or other solvent, and then back to the other reactant, then making the direct transfer. Is the idea of something occurring simultaneously in different parts of the system is what they have in common. I mean, these are the kind of thoughts that, you know, go through one's mind. That it's very concrete, but it's sort of beyond the simple box that one might normally be thinking of. One thinks of generalizations of sorts in the ideas, what have you. You know.
Hi, my name is Maxim. I'm take part in some chemistry Olympiad. I'm studying chemistry, and I want to ask you a question. What piece of advice you can give me about becoming a professional chemistry, about studying chemistry in university, about that all? What will be with chemistry in the future? With it, so what you can say?
Yeah, well, you know, chemistry covers a wide variety of fields and people with a wide variety of expertise. So nowadays, a chemistry department often involves people who find it even difficult to talk with each other. They work in such different areas. So the coverage that one can go into in chemistry is very wide. And within that framework, I guess one has to decide what does one enjoy the most doing? What does one enjoy the most learning? And like some people may think in terms of, well, that was an interesting synthesis of these compounds. Maybe I can do something in organic synthesis, or that was clever how they inserted this methyl group here, the ideas that they used and so on. And other people might think, oh, that was a wonderful theory, such simple ideas, and look at all the applications. And these involve very different types of backgrounds and expertise and so on. So chemistry is a huge field, covering, and it's become even wider and wider with the introduction of biology into it and so on. So somehow it's best if one finds out what one really enjoys, I think. I'm only speaking from my experience and so on. What one really enjoys doing, the challenges one finds, the one is doing just for the fun of it. So, and then pick that. Now, of course, some people are very talented in making things. Some people are very talented in mathematics. So, abilities in different areas differ a lot. And of course, if one can maximize somehow the amount of one's where one seems to be most able and what enjoys the most, probably that's the thing to do. Like in my own case, there was a possibility I might go into physics or might go into chemistry, and but I decided, and I think it was absolutely the right thing to do, to go into chemistry, because I think that the particular abilities that I had, such as they are, would be maybe more novel in chemistry than physics. So the important thing, though, I think, is what really, I mean, it's a lifetime. So it's desirable to have it in a way, what one enjoys doing if one can. And of course, recognizing that life is not always enjoyable. There are going to be ups and downs, of course. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I guess that's the last question. Are you familiar with the work of scientists Lev, Kuznetsov, and Dogonadze? And what do you think about this researches and these works and about them? Oh, wait a second. You should unmute yourself.
Okay, I've unmuted.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
So I didn't hear I didn't understand the question.
Yeah, are you familiar with the work of scientists Lev, Kuznetsov, and Dogonadze? And what do you think about this?
Yeah, the fields of what?
The work of the scientists Lev, Kuznetsov, and Dogonadze.
I'm not, but maybe if I saw the names written out, I might be able to say yes. I'm not. Oh, Kuznetsov?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a Kuznetsov who's a prominent electrochemist, or was. I'm not sure if he's still alive or not. But
what do you think about their work and the?
Oh well, there's.
What's your attitude for them?
Yeah. Yeah. There was I hate to raise these questions, but what was the former Soviet Union, in all of it now, including the Ukraine, there's a celebrated school of electrochemistry, that the leading electrochemists like Frumkin and so on were well known, and there was one member of that group was somebody whose name was Kuznetsov. Another member was Dogonadze. He was from Georgia, actually. But I would say leading work in electrochemistry was done by Frumkin and by the various groups that were sort of affiliated with it. There was Levitch, who wrote a book on hydrodynamics and developed the method for rotating disk method for studying fast electrochemical reactions. But yeah, no, there's a Kuznetsov who's famous as a scientist in the electrochemical field.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the lecture, for the great speaking with you. It was a big pleasure to see you and to talk with you today. I get that that's everybody feel the same what I feel right now. Thank you.
Well, and I hope next time we talk, it'll be under much happier circumstances.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.